And I suppose what keeps me sane is family and friends that I've known for years, especially my friends who just laugh, you know. They're quite impressed I'm a chef, but all of them think they're better cooks than me. My name is Angela Hartnett. I'm chef proprietor of Murano Restaurant in London and the Cafe Muranos and Merchants Tavern. I'm sitting in Murano Restaurant. We're just getting ready before service on a lunchtime in the sunny summer. And this is my life in objects. So the first thing is this wooden chopping board, which is probably about 60, 70 years old, I reckon. And it belonged to my grandmother, and she made all her pasta on it. And these are the utensils that we'd use. So the pasta cutter, the annolini cutter, a ravioli cutter, and this one we use for annolini as well. And when she died, I inherited all her items. When I first learnt to sort of cook Italian food, I learnt all of it from my grandmother, and we would use this board. You can still see sort of imprints where we've sort of marked them with our cutters. This was all done in the UK because when she was 19, my grandmother moved over to Wales. So although she was Italian, she lived in this country and brought all her children up in this country. So every Christmas and every Easter, before Christmas or Easter, I'd meet with her. And now we've carried on that tradition. So I sort of arrange a date where my aunt, my mum, my cousins come, and we all make the pasta together. So it's a nice tradition that's carried on for probably 40, 50 years, which is quite good. Okay, so next object, obviously as a chef you have lots of knives, different knives. This is probably one of my oldest knives. It's a Victorinox brand, which is quite I suppose a common brand, German brand, but very good, and I've used it for years and years. And you can see where the knife would normally go straight down, it's sort of got this bend where I've sharpened it so much. My now husband got it engraved with Angelina's fish knife on it for me as a little present. This knife, a fish knife again, but talking about grandparents and owning fish and chip shops. So this was my grandfather's fish knife. So he would portion all his fish with this when he ran his fish and chip shops, first in Wales and then up in Essex. And my uncle, as a Christmas present one year, gave this to me, just to say, you know, to pass it on. And this is my first Japanese knife that was bought for me by some friends of mine, Ed and Jackie Schneider. Japanese knives are now the norm, everyone seems to have them, but I still got my first one, and you know, just the fact that I've got it in my case is amazing because I'm quite lose so many things. So they're sort of three quite sentimental knives to me, which I still use. I definitely use my fish knife in Japanese, don't necessarily use my grandfather's portioning knife, but it's a great knife nonetheless. My first set of knives probably was bought for me, I think, by this guy Hans Schweitzer, and I think he might have bought this knife. You know, I went into cooking not having trained, just sort of managed to blag my way into this kitchen. I was probably about 22, 23, and Hans went and bought me a set of knives just to start me off. To me, everyone always says, what's the best knives? And I say, it's the one that you feel most comfortable with. This isn't the most expensive brand in the world. It's a good brand, but I feel so comfortable because over the years I've used it that I think it's one of my favourite knives. Ori! Come on. Come on. Good boy. That's it. Good boy. So this is Otis. He actually belongs to my sister. My sister, many years ago, probably about 2002, desperately wanted a dog, and she lived with me, and we got this little Jack Russell called Alfie from Battersea Dogs Home. Then my sister said, okay, I'm going to go and move to New York for 2 years, but left Alfie with us, which was fine. And then in New York, where her and my brother were both living, got little Otis, so he's a New Yorker. Then when Anne, after a 2-year contract was up, said, well, shall I leave Otis with you, Michael? And Michael goes, no, you have to take him back. So he came back to the UK, and he's been living with us ever since. When I come to work, if I'm not doing lunch service like today, and I bring him to work, everyone here just wants him to stay all day. But he does, you know, he's got his own character. You know, he wants to jump now. He's had enough, haven't you? Come on, go on. But he does molt like crazy, which drives you insane. Odie. So, this book is called La Ricetta Reggiana agli Italiani, and it's a cookery book. This isn't her cookery book. I've bought this as a sort of new copy, but it's a cookery book that basically has every region in Italy. It's all in Italian, and it just shows that, sort of for me, how Italian cookery is so regional and everyone has their own version of stuff. And I think this book is just beautiful. There's no pictures in it, which I think is just little illustrations, and every region will have its sort of their interpretation of it. And I think, to me, it's probably the real encyclopedia of Italian cookery, more so than any out there, I think. But you've got to understand Italian. So a lot of the time I go to my mum to get it translated, and she then goes, I'm not translating that recipe, go away. Because I asked her about panettone, and that was over like 4 pages. She said, no chance. So these are some first edition Elizabeth David cookbooks. I sort of started collecting these probably about, well, I've always liked Elizabeth David. It's a bit autobiographical, it's a bit sort of touristy in the sense it gives you a whole history of the region. I just think it's beautiful, and the way, I just think the covers as well, you know, the pictures are just extraordinary. And I do read them, you know, I think they're great cracking reads, you know, it's not just have them to look at, they're great books to read and get recipes from. And there is the famous Elizabeth David. And another thing I collect, which probably drives Neil insane, although he likes the objects, is Pool Pottery. And there's a fantastic shop near me in Columbia Market where this wonderful Irish lady has all these old tea sets. And so every now and again I go in and find these gorgeous tea sets. Or if you go to other sort of antique shops. And I just think they're beautiful. I just think the colours alone, these gorgeous sort of aquamarine and delightful greens are fantastic. And they're a beautiful design. And we do use them, although I go nuts because they've chipped too. So I sort of go a bit doolally at my lodger and my husband about that. Okay, so this one is, I mean, I wish I had enough money to say I could be a great art collector, but my cousin's a photographer and he sometimes exhibits, and one of his exhibitions there was this, so I love it, and I always try and support him and buy some of his work. So this hangs up quite happily in our hallway, and I just think it's a great picture. This was done by another friend of mine, Liz, and this is when I first became head chef of the Connaught. As a present, she drew this picture of spoons. You're always tasting with your spoon, and I always seem to have spoons in my pockets and bags. So Liz, as a present, Murray drew this beautiful spoon and engraved it for me and gave me this as a present. Finally, this is not necessarily an art thing, but this is Sean, who is the doorman at Scott's, which is a restaurant in London. And years ago, he did an article for the Observer where he said his favourite restaurant was my restaurant at the time, was the Connaught. And then he said he'd marry me. So my family got this and they said, don't ever say that you've never been asked. And they gave it to me when I got my MBE and all signed it, and all my friends. So it was a great, lovely picture that they did for me. So it was fantastic. And Sean hangs up in our hallway. I mean, you wouldn't necessarily hang it in Tate Modern or something, but, you know, for me, it means as much as some art that is hanging there, you know. And finally, what I've been sitting on all morning, this gorgeous chair. Neil and I bought this in Ashburton, down in Devon, a couple of years ago, purely because we loved the colour of the print on it. It was really gorgeous, and it's been upholstered. No idea how old it is, where it's from, or how, you know, anything really about the history of it, but it seems quite an old chair, and it's just absolutely gorgeous, so we keep it in our sitting room and sit on it. I suppose what makes it sentimental is something Neil and I bought together, because we don't know. I go and buy all this stuff, and he's like, what the hell? But actually, he really liked this chair, so we bought it together, which was quite a nice thing to do. Typically, as chefs, you probably end up with other chefs because you're working in such close environments. We've known each other for 30 years, and then sort of been together probably about the last 7 or 8 years, and then got married this year. So, yeah, all very good. Most of these objects are sentimental and related to family and friends, pretty much everything really, you know, there's nothing that's suddenly just unique to me. And I suppose that's what keeps you real, you know, you work in it, it's probably a very insincere society, everyone's, you know, Instagramming, tweeting, all the rest of it, we live through voyeurism. And I suppose what keeps me sane is family and friends that I've known for years, especially my friends who just laugh, you know, they're quite impressed I'm a chef, but all of them think they're better cooks than me, and it's just quite good fun, and I sort of like that, you know, because at the end of the day, I know cooking, restaurant chefing is important, but we are only cooking carrots and peas and that sort of thing. You know, we've got to keep it in perspective. So I think my family keep it quite real.